Hello, welcome to Down Your Throat. I'm Cammy, and with me today is my brother Nathan. Hello, Nathan.
So good to be with you. I will say your intro this time sounded a little less enthusiastic and energetic. Just an observation.
Coming in cold, coming in cold. So, this is your second visit on this program, and the first time you weren't vegan, and I checked in with you a few days ago. And how long has it been? It's been a while, like a few months, I think, since we had our first episode. And I checked in with you a few days ago. It turns out you're still not vegan. And so I just wanted to check in about that, see what's going on with that. So what does that mean when you say you're not vegan? To what degree are you? Do you still eat meat?
Um, for the most part, no, but I do eat fish. Probably like once every. I was gonna do it like once every week, but it's been like once every 3 weeks, maybe.
Did you see that new Netflix documentary everybody's talking about? The what's it called? I'm gonna look it up and edit this out. Netflix
Is
fish.
it about overfishing?
I honestly don't.
I suspect it might be a more environmental argument than a kind of moral one.
Yeah, one of the things you've always made clear whenever we've had this like one of these discussions, almost always you mention that the environmental issue is more compelling to you, and I've always found that curious because I guess I find it strange that you're like so concerned about making sure that I know that you don't really it's you don't have a deep compassion for animals, I guess is your point. Or I'm not really sure what you why do you always say that you are not moved by the treatment of animals? Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, mostly just because it's kind of my truth or how I kind of feel and think about it. That's not to say that my thinking is absent of those other sort of like, so like as I have not eaten like really any kind of like red meat or white like birds or like any kind of meat again, put fish aside for some time. I think I have like started to think about other moral kind of stories or narratives that might guide my behavior. But I always emphasize the environment piece just because that's the truth of like what has caused me to rethink and shift my diet. Like for you, the
If
moral,
yeah,
because for both of us, it's about a relationship. For you, it's about a more kind of like one-on-one relationship with the animal. And for me, when I talk about the environment, it's about a more, like a little bit more of a macro relationship with just sort of the place in which we live and how we relate to, other lives,
sure. I
animal and
guess I'm
otherwise.
so yeah. I mean, I like what I am definitely moved by the environmental aspect, and I'm definitely moved by the more uh, macro concepts that are occurring when we talk about these issues. I guess I just want to I want to poke at this thing where you're like very concerned about making it clear that you're not concerned about the humanitarian. Not that you're not concerned about it, but that it's like I don't know. It's like not important to you or something. I'm not. I guess I'm trying to understand what
Not
you.
as persuasive. It's not as
Okay,
compelling
here's my question
to
then.
me.
Shouldn't it be though?
I mean, it is if we're talking about like factory farming and the most like deplorable conditions under which like animal life might be cultivated for human use. I think I've told you, I watch these like survival shows. I've kind of moved from Naked and Afraid to Alone, and I mean, these are people that will, shed tears over their, killing a squirrel or a rabbit, and it's like a it's a thing, and it's not a horrible thing, right? And so like killing animals for survival, we've talked about this before, doesn't have the same kind of
Yeah, you bring up a very interesting scenario, and I'm not sure. I don't want to go too deep into this because I'm not sure it's going to be philosophically fruitful. But like those shows, yeah, they're kind of experiencing survival, but they also like volunteered to put themselves in those situations. So if we really are doing the math on like, okay, you know what I mean? Like at a certain point, it is kind of still like I watch that stuff. I watch them kill those animals, and I watch them weep, and yeah, I understand why they're weeping, but also a part of me is like, well, you didn't actually have to even be out here. You know what I mean? Like, but I don't want to get too deep into that unless you have something you wanted to say in response.
yeah. I mean, I would just say like not everybody weeps. Like
Oh, I know.
some
Yeah,
people are just like very cold and calloused about it because
totally,
they've
totally.
become accustomed to it. But they're even with those folks in that show. I mean, and watching there is a brutality to it. Like often these survivalists can't like take down big game, but there have been some shows now where they've been successful at that, and that's like another thing to watch. It's gory, it's gruesome.
It's
I
bad.
understand that it's um, yeah, but to me, I wouldn't say that it's just bad. Like it's context. Like these people are simultaneously like struggling to survive.
But like the part where we like, okay, now let's ruthlessly slaughter this animal that was living its life so that we can make this show. I mean, look, like there's a sure, I don't want to
Sure, doing
debate
it
that.
for
I
a
don't want to
show in
debate this.
capitalism,
I only have so
we
much
can go
time
into
today,
that. Sure.
and I don't want to debate that particular issue because I just feel like it's too external. I think to it. So just returning to you, I guess, or you and I. Yeah, we were talking about like you often want to make it clear that the more persuasive argument for you is the environmental one, and the less persuasive argument for you is the humanitarian one. What were you saying when I asked you like shouldn't it be? You were saying when I was asking like, well, shouldn't the humanitarian concern be as important as the environmental concern? You were saying could you I guess reiterate?
I mean, the show is just one way of pointing to how like context matters. And to me, the environmental arguments can not completely transcend context, but that they do a little more than kind of like moral arguments might.
Hmm.
There's a brutality to everything,
Hmm.
and a gruesomeness that is often hidden, both in terms of the way that we think about meat consumption, but even like just agriculture and plants. Like, I mean, the lettuce that you eat. I mean, how many rabbits do they probably kill in keeping them away from nibbling on the crops
Hold on.
that we're trying to.
Okay. So now are you arguing that by eating lettuce, what's your argument here? Is your argument that like there's no way to prevent animal slaughter, so
It's
we
just
should.
complicated. It's complicated,
Well, I
and I
think
don't
it
know
is.
if.
I agree that it's complicated, but I think if you're going to use an argument, like if you're going to say like, well, if you eat lettuce, then rabbits get killed. Then if you're using that as like a logical justification, then the classic arguments against that would be like, well, the crops that we feed to livestock are going to also have the same problems, except that we need to grow way more of them, and so the problems are just exponential compared to feeding ourselves with that lettuce. On top of that, there are methods of farming lettuce that don't involve slaughtering rabbits and doing all of this stuff, but none of that is going to be attainable for us, or even like nobody's even going to be thinking about that so long as nobody cares enough to even move away from slaughtering sentient animals for the sole purpose of eating them and enjoying their flesh. Is that
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can say it's for the sole purpose of doing that, right? I
for
mean,
most
people
people?
have been
Okay,
doing
okay.
that
For
for
some people,
survival
it's
for a
not.
long
Okay,
time.
sure,
So,
I'll give you that. And but I guess I okay. Let me be very specific in the context I'm talking about, or maybe let me understand your own perspective on the terms here. Like, for your survival, you wouldn't say that it's necessary at all, right?
To kill animals?
Right.
No.
And so I would say I will give you by default the context where, like, if you have to kill animals for survival, sure. The whole debate that I want to have, though, is like in your context, in our context, right, where it's not for survival. It is for pleasure because it is unnecessary, right? Then how do we justify it?
Right. Well, but I would also defend like somebody who wants to like venture off into the forest, probably not for a show, right, or to win $1 million. That maybe makes it more complicated, but just to like go and survive in the wilderness and to live in nature and to survive. However, and that might be a conscious choice, right, to kind of like leave some of the social order as we know it and to struggle to survive in a way that is more. I don't know, that we might call more.
It's a little bit cheating, right? Because you're kind of going back to the survival thing in a kind of roundabout way.
But
I don't know.
But some people want to live that way, though. Some people want to have that existence and that relationship with nature.
And you cannot. You figure you cannot be like. Can you not grow vegetables and live a vegan lifestyle in the woods? I mean, I'm sure
you might be able to. You might be able to, but it'd be harder.
How about this? It would be harder, and for the sake of this, because it's just not. That's not the particular debate I want to have. I'll say like, okay, fine. If you want to venture into the woods and you get really hungry and you need to kill an animal, go for it. But I want to talk about you specifically because, you know, I can't really. There are too many factors. Like everybody is going to have all these different nuances, but I think the point of this show has to be, I think, for me to kind of address each individual and their own perspective and how they individually are justifying it, because of course we could sit here and hypothesize for a long time about all kinds of different things, but does that sound fair? Or?
That sounds fair and reasonable. I would just say that somewhere between like changing how an individual thinks and how systems function to inform the way that societies think is this like meso level. You know, there's a Margaret Mead quotation here, just that like the individual stories about like what meat consumption means are also connected to that larger social thing in terms of how we all make sense of it. But I think it's valuable to like focus on individuals and think about changing them. I think backing away from that to think about the bigger, broader stories that are inside of me and thread it out, and I can complicate in some ways. But sure, go ahead, change me.
Yeah. I mean, it's complicated, right? Like the larger story is actually just a billion tiny stories that are all occurring simultaneously. But anyway, so I guess having said all of that, I guess I'm trying to get into your perspective, and I'm trying, you know, what's the justification, you know, like why not go vegan? Is it too inconvenient? Does it not taste good enough? Does it take too much time to do? Does it not really seem to you like a genuinely effective movement?
I mean, I believe that it's possible to eat a sustainable amount of fish. You know, the milk industry, I'm like, you know, again, like because of the deliciousness of Oatly, I've been able to leave milk behind. Cheese is something that I enjoy, and I again feel like there are more sustainable sort of like sources for that cheese, as much as I'll admit like it's complicated and there are many practices that are invisible to me, even if I am, you know, trying to buy all my cheese at a farmer's market or something like that.
It's tough. I mean, have you considered like what that sustainable cycle
or eggs? I can't do eggs if I'm vegan because I like.
You cannot do eggs if you're vegan. No.
I've seen the factory farming, right, and this is why I spend like, you know, $10 a carton on a dozen eggs
that are what called that with what label?
that are, I mean, I know that free range is not always a great label because it can mean that they're just roaming around in a factory, right? But the eggs that I get are
More expensive.
um, yeah. What do
Okay,
they
so
say?
you eat eggs and fish and cheese, and those are kind of like your three things right now.
Yeah.
All right. And so I mean, obviously you're clearly comfortable, right, with eating those things.
Yeah. I mean, I'm I don't eat a lot of fish. Like I'm primarily vegetarian.
Mhm.
Um,
But you
but
still eat
sure, I'll
cheese,
defend it all.
and
I,
and so okay. I'm trying to figure. I'm just trying to decide which one to drill into. I guess let's start with cheese. Like, why do you not feel like the there's suffering involved in the like are you getting some kind of special cheese to your knowledge, or
Not always, no.
so does it not bother you that suffering is or, you're paying for these animals to have kind of shit lives just for the taste of cheese?
I mean, to a degree. I mean, but this is where, like, I believe in the reduction of suffering above the elimination of suffering. Not that the elimination of suffering isn't something we shouldn't aspire for, but like there is suffering and brutality in everything. The people who pick your
But okay,
crops are
sure.
also.
But I mean, don't you think there's a big difference between paying for someone to procure something that requires them to do a particular set of things to an animal, right? And buy and like whatever like worst case scenario you're describing for vegan, you're basically saying like, okay, vegan vegetables are it's just as bad as paying to you know paying to for to brutalize an animal, basically. I mean, it just feels very disingenuous to me personally when people make that argument that like, well, everything is bad, so I'm gonna buy this thing that I know for sure causes suffering, even though I don't need to. I don't know. I'm trying to understand, and I guess I'm just not quite getting it. But I guess what you're saying is like, for you, the whatever like implication eating the cheese has for you, it's not either it's not like big enough, or you're not sure, or maybe I guess you're saying like, everything we do has suffering, and so I guess you don't want to have to think about, or you don't want to have to make this particular compromise, I guess, because you figure it's not. I guess you figure it won't do enough. Is what is what I'm understanding. You're saying it doesn't do enough to go vegan, basically.
Um, no, I don't think I'm saying that it doesn't do enough. It
Well, okay. So what do you mean
it
then
does.
when you say you believe in the reduction of suffering rather than the elimination of suffering? Like, what do you like, and how
I,
does that correlate to not going vegan, basically?
well, so like I could probably buy the argument that veganism is the like you know does the most to reduce the suffering of animals. There's still some brutality that gets woven into the mechanized
And
agriculture.
if I could just quickly interject, like, um, all like, yes, there's still brutality, but like just the act of going vegan pushes the world in a direction away from that,
No, it doesn't. How does it?
because
Because you think that we don't have to do
it's
the
a
as much crops to raise the animals. Yeah.
no, even just on a cultural behavioral level, when our food is not slaughtered sentient creatures, then in our minds as a society and as a culture, violence is less normalized, and therefore farmers who would normally shoot a rabbit in the face for eating a carrot are less likely to do that because we're moving away from violence, would be my argument.
Maybe. I mean, but the farmer's going to protect the crops because we still live in a world of capitalism where that crop is money and the rabbit is a threat to it. Maybe
Okay.
technology gets so advanced that there's some like electrified fence and a couple rabbits get fried and then all the rabbits know that they can't and they're on the other side and then I don't know, the
So
rabbits starve or they figure out some other way to survive and human
so
beings
you're
live separately.
saying
I was going to grant you the argument that veganism as a dietary practice probably does the most in reducing the suffering of animals, but it doesn't eliminate it, right? That's all I was going to say. And
okay.
so, am I causing more suffering um, of animal life by eating cheese? Yeah. Is it the death? No. I mean, yes. There's suffering involved
And there's
there,
death.
and there's death. And the same thing is true with. I mean, but the idea that we escape that when we start
Well, I don't
respecting the
think it's
lives
about
of
yeah,
animals
sure.
is the argument that we got into last time. Because I think that we already mistreat human beings
Yeah.
in that mechanized production of food, whether it be animal byproduct or plant byproduct, right? And so maybe they're getting a wage, but they're not getting a fair living wage, right? Like we're creating a world that is less fair for human beings right now. So like the idea that we should, I don't know. It's an interesting argument, and I don't dismiss the possibility that like empathizing with animals through like veganism allows us to then empathize with human beings more. But it's always
Well,
just
I
seemed
think
to
it
me that
depends
like
on
if we're going
the
to empathize with
yeah.
anybody, it should be the human beings, and we're not capable
Well,
of doing that.
I think it's all the way. I think it's all completely interconnected. Like I think it's all one thing. It's like when you have compassion, you have compassion, and when you don't, you don't. You know what I mean? And you know that's why when you hear stories of serial killers and all these guys, you so often hear what did they you know they beat animals when they were young because they don't have compassion. And I think that's why I feel that's how I see it, and that's why I feel so strongly about it because it's like I don't the human to human, human to animal. It's just I don't. That's semantics. At the end of the day, it's like one being, one sentient being having compassion for others. Right. That's the pitch. That's love, and that's what we need. And you know, if I'm being honest, since we have so little time, I think to say like, okay, yes, it would be going vegan would reduce suffering, but I'm not going to do it. Is you know that's anti-love, that's anti-compassion, and if you're okay with that, then all right. But like I suspect that deep down you're not okay with that, and I suspect that nobody is okay with that deep down in their heart. Um, yeah,
I
I don't
think
know.
that there are
Yeah,
some.
go ahead.
I think that there are some threads of truth to this love point that you are making. I would just make an argument of what I think is more the root of the issue here. That it's not actually about diet and us eating meat. It is about capitalism. It is about
Well,
toxic
okay.
masculinity, and it is
Uh,
about U.S. hegemony.
okay,
Like those are the
I have
forces
to
that are
disagree.
well, okay. Well, we can pick one of those, and I might even like ground capitalism at the
Well,
sort
I
of
think all of those things are
center.
totally problems. I mean, I agree that all of those things are absolutely problems, but I think it's unfair to just attribute all of the darkness to capitalism. I think you know, it's like these are people doing
I
these things, making these choices. Even you are making choices, you know, to against, and that's
I agree. I
so.
agree with that, but I also think that it's true of the point that you're making about like if we would all be vegan, then we would like the world would be better, right? Like you're putting the diet at the root of like
Uh,
how we orient to other
you're
human
kind
beings
of
and animals,
I would say
and
that's
I
a
think
yeah.
it's so much more
Well,
capitalism.
I think that's an exaggeration of my viewpoint. I think the reason I'm talking about this particularly to you as if it's the most important thing is because we agree already on everything else. We agree that I mean I'm pretty sure we agree on basically everything except this. So that's why maybe it feels like this is the only thing that matters to me. But no, I mean I would say that capitalism is probably a bigger problem than veganism, and but that's not the only thing. I would say that's a part of it, and then there's another part that's maybe even larger and more important, that is like our soul and our ability to choose. And I would say even the reason that capitalism is ruining the world is because people have relinquished all of their like will, all of their like their choices. They've given them up to corporations for for a few bucks, like for a job or whatever. My point is basically like, the reason that like if people were true to themselves, a lot of things would be different. I feel a lot of things would be different. One of those things would be people would be vegan because they'd be like, oh, I don't want to eat dead animals or contribute to the suffering of other living beings.
You just need a corporation to sell that.
Right. Well, but yeah. But you're not with me on this, and I'm trying to figure out why.
I'm not with you on
veganism. You're not
my
vegan.
Own individual.
So let me take you back. Let me take us back then to this what we were talking about. You were saying, yeah, maybe veganism would reduce harm, that would reduce suffering, and obviously it would have all these other impacts that are positive. Why is that not enough?
Well, it is enough for me to
make significant
to move toward
right.
veganism. Yeah, like I want to support all of the vegan foods and restaurants, and like when new meatless products come out, like excited to try things. That's more of the like,
but why are
how can I, as a good capitalist, support veganism?
Why are you not like with the movement, I guess, like why are you not like why are you not as I won't say annoying about it as I am, but why are you not as committed to it as I am?
I mean, I guess I'm not entirely sure. Like I'm willing to continue interrogating, and I've been thinking about my food politics, as I shared with you from before we were having conversations. And from our first conversation, some of these things were already in motion, right? I think milk has been the main difference, I think, between then and now. But like being with the movement is like wearing some kind of like identity label.
No.
I'm not.
It's just I would disagree. You don't have to.
A little bit.
You don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to be annoying like me. You just have to when people say.
But that's what you mean by the movement.
No, I just mean when somebody offers you cheese, you go like, "Nah, I'm vegan," and then they're like, "Oh, Nathan's vegan." You have no idea how big of a deal it is when one person is vegan. It makes everybody around.
No, I do know, but I do know because
but it's not enough for you.
People have just having a different dietary preference, right? It comes with sort of a like. I feel like for some people, it's like, X, Y, and Z is gluten intolerant or vegetarian or vegan or whatever it is. But certainly, it impacts then what you eat and dine with other people, and it
normalizes
it.
Maybe those people who would normally be like, oh, he's vegan. Once they know 100 people who are vegan, they think about it differently. They stop going like, oh, it's a vegan. They start thinking like, wait, why am I not vegan?
And that's what I'm more committed to. If you think about me as a movement, like I'm all about normalizing more vegan foods. Am I marking meat eating as like this other thing that is an aberration and must be stopped, and these people are bad? No.
Am I saying you're bad and that what you're doing is an aberration? I mean, almost.
No, but the practice of what the behavior is, right? Whether you mark the person as that or not depends. But like to go back to like wearing the label of being a vegan or not being a vegan, or being in the movement or not being in the movement, whereas I think of myself as like moving, right? Like, and I'm trying to be thoughtful and critical about how I have come to think about myself, others, my dietary choices.
All right. I mean, here, I would pitch you on the importance of identifying as a vegan.
Yeah, but what's the difference between me?
Yeah.
But what's the difference between me saying, like I'm I'm trying to eat more vegan, or like, can we do a vegan meal, or Shazam, or
Hmm.
yeah,
What's the difference between that and going like hardcore with it?
yeah,
Well, I mean, there's two differences. The first difference, and I think the most important one, is your internal sense of self, your internal moral compass, your own soul, how you feel.
I mean, do you think that people who eat meat are soulless in some ways, or that they're like
I mean,
giving
I
up
ate
their
meat for a
souls?
long time. I guess I'm
And
not
you've been
really.
regrowing your soul ever since going vegan.
I think that what makes your soul kind of start to erode with this issue is once you learn about everything, once you know everything, that's when the choices start to affect you, right? Like if you're just somebody who doesn't know about any of this stuff, like then what you're doing doesn't really mean that much to you. But once you learn about all the implications involved, right, then there's a weight to it, and you can lift that weight. You can leave that weight behind.
Yeah, I just like soul erosion feels like a really like like I don't think of I to go back to the stories stuff. I just think that people believe in different stories, and that we can add to those stories. We can
What
maybe
is that?
challenge some of those stories in some cases. It's like what does it mean to eat meat, and does that mean that you are
Okay,
participating in suffering,
I'm
right?
not
And
talking
I
about
think that
eating
what you're
meat. I'm
making
talking
is
about,
like to be aware,
uh-huh.
but I'm also saying that like awareness is not just like a thing that is about getting more information.
Hmm.
Awareness is something that is framed by those stories that we believe in. And especially when we've been engaged in a particular behavior for a long time or for all of our lives, those stories become really powerful. And so it's not like actually about getting people to be more informed, it's getting them to think differently about the stories that they have come to know and use as sort of, navigation material for their life.
I don't know. I mean, what you say doesn't completely resonate with me because I think, well, maybe I just don't know exactly what you mean. Like the story you tell yourself, it's your reality, right? Like what's real to you is the story you tell yourself. And so, in my opinion, it is, and it is really mostly a matter for most people. Rather, it's an issue of education and like knowledge and like learning new information, and then applying that and thinking about that information, contemplating on that information, and applying it to your behavior. That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah, and I think that there's a piece of that, and I also feel like the other way that like
So you were saying like I'm telling some kind of story. Is that the point that you're kind of making? Is that like, okay, my story is different from your story?
well, yeah, I think that
So what is your story
that
then
that
that it's okay? Like why is your story such that you feel it's right to not to like participate in the animal agriculture as it is, and really just in any kind of animal agriculture, knowing what's involved. Like why? I'm just trying to understand the difference between your story and my story.
well, I'm my story is still emerging, and I am open to, and I have been open to, I think, other people's way of thinking about and approaching these issues. And so, there was some epiphany moment where you decided to think differently about your diet, and I think that there is a way of framing that as like a shift in the story that we're telling ourselves, right? There's the story of the stories that inform everything,
I mean,
right?
I just
And
worry that we're getting too caught up in the semantics of the philosophy, and rather than just like the bare facts of what we do and the consequences behind them, right? Like if I were to boil it down and just say like, well, look, you know that eating cheese leads to these animals suffering. You know that eating eggs deprives chickens from whatever, and you know that all the chicken labels are pretty much bullshit. So why do you participate in it, knowing that in your story? Why do you participate in those things when you could be, in your story, the person who does not participate in those things and speaks against the bad stuff that's going on? I mean, I guess you're saying your story's still happening. You haven't maybe landed yet on a particular thing, right? Is that?
Yeah, I don't want to present any of the story stuff as like a static thing, but yes, I have I mean, I am making choices every day about how I live my life, and that is guided by the storied and theoretical sort of frames I use to understand my behaviors, the behaviors of others, who I am, all of that. I mean, I guess I'll circle back to kind of where we started a little bit. Like, I'm just trying to live in relationship with nature and be more thoughtful about that.
Can you not do that without eating, without hurting animals? Can you not, can you at least not like pay for, you know what I mean? Like you're paying for these animals. How is that living in harmony with nature?
Yes, yes. Well, okay. So the part of the relationship, I don't know how well this is going to resonate with you, but it's just like, there are things that I know about what's happening out there. You critique the like labels for foods as not being accurate, and I agree with that to a large extent. I think that is, that is a problem that maybe could be fixed with like advocacy about like humane sort of ways of doing things, or like good practices, things that are good for the environment, things that are good for animals. I'm trying to live in a relationship with nature, but I'm also like I'm not subtracting the fact that I make selfish decisions sometimes.
Me too.
That are more, maybe palate driven than other things. And that again is like an evolving story for me. And maybe I think that like some dairy products are not, explicitly connected to killing, right? It's like connected to suffering. Maybe there's a moral argument that gets wrapped in there with me. Maybe I just freaking love cheese, but I will say that like I'm trying to eat less of it, right? And I'm trying to eat more of this other stuff. And I don't wear veganism as an identity, but I certainly don't, try to get out of eating vegan foods. If anything, I am pursuing and trying to encourage others to. But I'm not maybe with the movement as like a discrete thing that I'm contained within. But I would again sort of borrow the language of I am moving. And I am moving based on stories and some of the information and education. And I maybe participate in the dialogue, but this is where I have landed, and there is a certain amount of suffering that again feels like it is wrapped in. I do feel an obligation to move toward a reduction of that suffering. I'm excited for lab created milk that will then make cheese that I can.
But you're not waiting.
Well, I'm I'm also really kind of stopped doing yogurts, and the other day I bought like an almond yogurt and was like, all right, let me try this. But like it's not. Well, unfortunately, like Griffin ate it, so I don't even get to try it. But I don't know. Whatever.
I'm not really trying to shame you or something. I'm not trying to get.
Well, you're trying to change me, right?
I mean.
Shame
I would say
tool.
even that's an exaggeration. I'm really just I would say more than any of that, I'm really just trying to understand your perspective. Obviously you feel like I'm trying to change you because I don't understand your perspective and I'm on the other side of an issue and I keep trying to ask you why you do what you're doing, and that has the implication that I'm trying to change you and get you to stop doing that. And I guess the truth is, yes, I want you to stop doing that for the sake of the animals, because there are individuals. It is easy to disconnect that there are individual animals at the ends of these products, but there really are. they really are like not having a good time, is that really worth just like you could just not eat that stuff, right? Like,
I mean, I continue to acknowledge that our behaviors and our practices are political, and that they have implications for people and for animals, and everybody needs to be more thoughtful about how we make those choices.
which is a great slogan for veganism.
Yeah, and it could be applied to other things as well, like racism and wealth inequality, probably.
Right, but again, those aren't issues that you're contributing to, generally speaking.
Yeah, but I think like in the same question, like to what degree are we interrupting those systems, and where are we focusing our energy? So like to not do, I mean, Ibram X. Kendi says like if you're not doing something to fight racism, then you are maintaining the system in some ways. So
Right,
it can't be like a passive thing. I can't just say like I'm not a racist and feel good and retreat. Like I mean, have to think about more thoughtful ways of dismantling things that are external to me, and also maybe informing. Yeah.
Interesting.
But I think you feel the same way about veganism, right? There is no neutral.
I mean,
if you were neutral, then you're not doing anything to. So the arguments that I feel like you sometimes make about veganism are also being made about anti-blackness and white supremacy.
yeah, and Miles, Miles like went all ham on me about like, oh, what are you doing to fight racism or whatever, when I don't know, like, I guess I'll just be honest with you about the honest response that comes to mind. What I'm doing is not paying for black people to be slaughtered so that I can eat their flesh. I guess the difference that comes to mind between these two issues in this particular context is like, okay, I come to you and I come to Miles and I'm like, hey, you're doing this thing that's kind of bad. Would you consider not doing that as like an action item that will help the world and these animals? Whereas to return that with like, well, what about racism though? And it's like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't seem fair to me to like I don't know. Okay, yeah, that's also a problem. Yes, it is. But that's, you know what I mean? Like it's just confusing. Like why are you bringing that up now? It's just, why is that? It seems like a very convenient time. You know what I mean?
So, I mean, stuff's complicated, right?
Yes.
I mean, like, what white supremacy has historically, in different moments, gotten wrapped up with veganism. I'm not saying that those things should be connected at all moments, but I think that there's more nuanced arguments to make about how, like, a movement toward veganism, like, I mean, there has to be. You want to focus on the individual, right? And say, like, why are your food practices not better? And I think that a better approach is like, why are the systems that might encourage people to like eat like more healthy foods and like less foods with cornstarch, and that more structural systemic responses might be
it's
like, I don't know, more flavorful and palatable ways of thinking about.
People have to care.
Persuading people to, with me, start moving.
If I could be totally off on this, but it just feels like a little bit of a cop out. Basically, you're kind of saying like, hey, it's not on me, it's on the system. Focus on this. Don't focus on me.
I think the stories that we believe in are also like systems, and those two things are in some ways like interchangeable.
Fair enough. Thank you so much for joining me. Even though it sounds like you're going to continue contributing to the slaughter of fish, which, by the way, are very smart, intelligent creatures and can suffer. Fish feel pain. Check out that movie, Seaspiracy. Love you, brother. Stop eating meat. I mean, you don't, but stop eating product. And
like we don't call. All right, that's cool. It's good to know.
No. Fish is meat, absolutely.
Fish
Stop
is
eating meat. I'm bleeping that out.
And fish eating is murder. I think.
Yeah.
You're bleeping that out? Wait, that's the only thing you're going to bleep out?
The part where I didn't know what I was talking about, I'm bleeping out. Thank you so much for joining me on this show. And
love you, brother.
Love you too.
Sorry for the blender.
No worries.